Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Assembly meeting of July 12th. And first, I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for being here, and also those at home watching on TV or on the Internet. Thank you so much for joining us. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Ms. Domboski?
Present.
Mr. Craw?
Present.
Mr. Evans?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Present.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Honored to be here.
Mr. Trainee?
Present.
Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Starr is on his way. Mr. Dunbar?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, I see you in the back. Would you mind coming to the podium to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, item 4A through
Madam
E?
Chair, move to approve items 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D, and 4E.
Can I have a second? Second. Seeing no objection, those minutes are approved. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have two items I'd like to bring to the Assembly's attention. The first is, in light of the tragedies that happened to this country, and especially in what occurred in Dallas, I want to say that I'm incredibly proud of our community, that through the good efforts of the community and the police department, we demonstrated a kind of cohesion and unity that I think we can build on, and that will show an example for other cities across the country. And we ought to be very grateful that we have such terrific people who live here. Second thing I want to bring mention to is that circus down in Juneau. You know, we try and insulate ourselves as much as possible from what occurs at the state level. But like any house that's insulated, when it gets really cold outside, it gets cold inside. And the failure of the legislature to grapple meaningfully with the state's fiscal problem is having consequences here. The governor issued a series of vetoes that caused a reduction in revenue to this municipality. You'll hear more about that later on. But ignoring a problem has never made it go away. And I think that the people who had the honor of being elected, who have the public trust, have a responsibility to follow through and develop some kind of solution. Ignoring the problem of the fiscal situation that we have in Juneau, the imbalance, the structural difficulties, all that does is put that responsibility solely on the shoulders and wallets of the taxpayers of Anchorage. And so we need to make sure that we can encourage our friends, both sides of the aisles, all the many factions that are down there, to rise to the occasion and come forward with some kind of fiscal plan, or at least give some indication of the reasons for failing to act, because the failure to act results in a failure to deliver solutions, and the cost for that is borne by people across this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chair's report, there is nothing for me to report this evening other than the fact that I think we're going to be out of here early and enjoy the rest of the sun. Committee reports. I'll start with Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a committee report, but I do want to echo the sentiments of Mayor Berkowitz. This weekend, some may know, some may not, but Bill and Sue Aherns, they live in Eagle River, and their son, Lauren, was one of the Dallas police officers who was murdered. And so our thoughts and prayers go out to them, but the community of Eagle River really felt that one.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Mr. Croft.
No committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Homelessness Committee, the hottest ticket in town, is meeting on July 20th, Wednesday at 11, from 11 to 12:30 in room 155. And immediately following that, we're going to have a special meeting of the Public Safety Committee that will be going over some of the new ordinances that are being introduced by the Law Department in light of the criminal justice reform measure that was just passed in the state.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Just that I went down to the National League of Cities meeting. You were down there, Ms. Gray Jackson. And we discussed public safety the whole day. And the problem is just, I was talking to a councilman from Dallas. This is before it happened. And they knew what the problem was that's going across this country. So nationally, we're trying to deal with this on a national basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele.
Madam Chairman, the Enterprise Committee, we are not holding a meeting this month. The next meeting is scheduled for next month, the third Thursday of the month, from 11 to 12 in 155. So hopefully everybody can be there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the Ethics and Election Committee will also not be meeting this month because of a conflict with the Economic Forecast Luncheon that day. So we'll be resuming our meeting in the month of August. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No committee report. However, I have a brief report in my capacity as the Assembly's representative to UAA and APU. I met with President Jim Johnson and had a good meeting with him, President of UAA. Of course, he expressed that their number one issue still is the Brigade extension. I spoke with him more about a possible internship program where UAA students could possibly intern at the Anchorage Assembly, and we're hoping to put that together. So also for my colleagues, if you'd like to have a UAA student or an APU student be an intern for you in the coming year, please see me after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your efforts, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. I sat in on a teleconference by the Alaska Municipal League where John Hosey, I believe is the governor's chief of staff, spoke. At that point, we didn't know what the governor would veto or present, but he suggested there might be a sales tax and budget vetoes, and in fact, he was correct. And he was frustrated that the Municipal League did not aggressively support the government's plan during the regular session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee, can I have a motion to incorporate both the addendum and
And
the laid on
move to
table?
incorporate both the addendum to the agenda and laid on the table items.
Can I have a second? Thank you. Addendum item 9A3, AR 2016-195, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly designating July 15, 2016 as Charles D. Williams Day in recognition and appreciation for his dedicated and faithful service to the community of Anchorage and the Alaska area. Item 9B5, AR 2016-196, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its protest regarding a new restaurant eating place liquor license number 5490 for Alaska SB LLC DBA Smash Burger with restaurant designation permit located at 317 West 104th Avenue, Anchorage, AK 99515, and authorizing the municipal clerk to take certain action. Item 9D25, Assembly Memorandum 487-2016, Amendment Number 3 to MV Transportation, Inc., for the operation of the Anchorage Coordinated Paratransit System. Item 9DE7, Information Reports AIM 84-2016, vetoes resulting in reductions in State of Alaska funding to MOA as of July 7, 2016. Item 9DF12, Ordinance and resolutions for introduction. AO 2016-83, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending certain provisions of Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 8 Penal Code, Title 9 Vehicles and Traffic, and Title 14 Administrative Enforcement. Item 12, appearance requests. B, Ronald Leva regarding gun disposal. Laid on table items, item 9F13, AO 2016-84, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly waiving Title 21 rezone fees for the rezoning of Tracts 1, 2, and 3 of the Southgate subdivision per Plat 2014-137 from I-1 to B3. Item 15, special orders. A, AO 2016-1, an emergency ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending certain provisions of the Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 8 Penal Code, and Title 9 Vehicles and Traffic. Mr. Trainee, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Trainey. Mr. Trainey just reminded me I need to ask for unanimous approval to incorporate the addendum and the laid-on-table items. Seeing no objection, they are incorporated. Mr. Trainey, motion, please.
Motion to approve the consent agenda, Madam Chair,
And a second.
as amended.
Thank you. Now I'll see if anyone would like to pull any items, and I will start with Mr. Weddleton.
I want to pull 9F5.
9F5. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull item 9 Alpha 3.
The groups are reading.
On the addendum. Anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to be pulling 9B2, B as in boy.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele.
No, I don't. Madam
Thank you, Mr.
Chair.
Steele. Mr. Trainey.
9D21, ma'am.
D as in dog.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Trainey. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 9 Alpha 1.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Evans.
9 Bravo 3.
B3. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Croft.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything to pull. Did 14-1, I-1 make it on? It was on the back side, and I couldn't tell whether you stopped at appearance requests.
It's on
or
the,
incorporate that.
well, you know what, Mr. Croft, you're exactly right. I didn't read that into the record, but we did approve the addendum to the agenda, but I thank you for mentioning that.
Good.
Anything to pull? No, thank you. Okay, Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did anybody pull 9A2? I have it for presentation, but I'm not sure.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and pull it.
9 Apple 2, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Oh, that's it. Okay, so I'll go back over items that pulled. 9A1, if I miss any, let me know. 9A2, 9B2, 9B3. On the addendum, 9A3 and 9D21, and then 9F5. Did I miss any?
Nope.
Okay, great. Doesn't look like it.
Need to vote on it.
Okay, let's vote on the remaining items on the consent agenda, and let's put it on the board. Who's missing? Okay, great. Okay, we're done. Okay, the consent agenda is approved other than items that were pulled. First item pulled is item 9A1, AR 2016-186, a resolution recognizing Edie Burden for her more than 18 years of dedicated service to the municipality of Anchorage. Can I get a motion to approve?
Second.
Seeing no objection, that resolution is approved. Who's going to read and who's going to present? Who's reading? I'm reading either? Okay. Okay.
Bring all your friends and family. Come on. All of you. Let's go. This is your day, young lady.
Okay, great. I have the honor of reading this resolution. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing Edie Burden for her more than 18 years of dedicated service to the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Edith was born in the territory of Alaska and witnessed the colorful and diverse history of Anchorage. And whereas Edie remembers well the 1984 earthquake and the subsequent rebuilding of Anchorage, as well as many of the movers and shakers who made this town what it is today. And whereas Edie started working for the municipality of Anchorage in 1998 in the finance department, and then transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services. And whereas Edie moved back to City Hall to work in general accounting, and she finished her last 10 years with the municipality of Anchorage in the Information Technology Department. And whereas Edie personally sings Happy Birthday in her uniquely rich voice and joyful star when a co-worker has a birthday. And whereas Edie is known for her infectious laugh, quick smile, bold fashion sense, sassy wit, and kind and caring heart. Because of her incredible work ethic, institutional knowledge, and innovative problem solving, she will be missed. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes Edie Burden for her more than 18 years of service to the municipality of Anchorage, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 12th day of July 2016.
Thank you. That's your responsibility. You guys that look after, all right?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Will you pull it? No comment, Edith? Okay.
Fun fact this time.
Well, I had thanked everybody. It was a wonderful 18 years with the municipality. After being born and raised here, it's like I'm home. I'm not leaving the state. That's my whole family, as you see, is still here. So I'm just going to spend time with my friends. I miss so many people. I didn't know I was going to miss as many people as I do. There's so many special people in my life at the municipality in 18 years' time. Amanda, close to my heart. Ruth, close to my heart. I have so many. But I want to thank for everyone that took the time out to do this for me, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Love you.
The next item on the agenda is AR 2016-187, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Sandra Scobie for 30 and a half years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Can I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
And a second? Thank you. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. And Ms. Dombrowski is going to present, and I'm going to read. Wait 1 second, Dick. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Sandra Scobie for 30 and a half years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Sandra Scobie began working for the municipality of Anchorage, MOA, in December 1985. And whereas Sandra's career has spanned the administrations of 8 mayors, Tony Knowles, Tom Fink, Rick Meisum, George Wirch, Mark Begich, Acting Mayor Matt Claman, Dan Sullivan, and Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. And whereas Sandra began her MOA career as a temporary employee at Anchorage Telephone Utility in December 1985. And whereas Sandra became a full-time permanent employee with the library as an office assistant in February 1986. And whereas after 6 years at the library, Sandra transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services as an office assistant in 1992. And whereas in 2000, Sandra transferred to Solid Waste Services, where for 11 years she was the junior administrative officer in charge of payroll, Family Medical Leave Act, workers' compensation, and so forth. And whereas Sandra in 2011 transferred to Employee Relations, when the municipality made the decision to centralize the administration of Family Medical Leave Act, Alaska Family Leave Act, and military leave, Sandra was instrumental in implementing and operationalizing the absence management program. And whereas Sandra has been a subject matter expert of the SAP Time Management Project with a focus on leave of absences and the Family Medical Leave Act, Alaska Family Leave Act, military leave, and administrative leave. And whereas Sandra's loyalty and professionalism are incomparable. And whereas she is an example of what a public servant should be, as shown by her work efforts in assisting directors, managers, supervisors, and employees in navigating the complex and highly regulated arena of the Family Medical Leave Act, Alaska Family Leave Act, and military leave, and in her diligent commitment to our community. And whereas Sandra's civil service has been pivotal as a leave administrator, and whereas she will be retired from her position as of July 15, 2016, the Anchorage Assembly hereby recognizes and honors Sandra Scobie for her devoted service to the municipality of Anchorage and its employees, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 12th day of July 2016.
Thank you. Does it band? Thank you so very much. Most of my working career has been working with the internal customer, and I thank each and every employee that I've had the opportunity to work with. I've had exceptional leadership over the last 30 years, and I hope this comment to Mayor Berkowitz, please don't ever forget what a wonderful workforce you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to say I was truly honored when I was told that you wanted me to read your resolution.
Yes, thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Elvie.
You're welcome. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, I failed to pull something earlier. I need to pull it now. Motion to reconsider. Item 9E7. It's information memorandum, but we need to discuss it.
Okay, we need to vote on.
That's unanimous.
Ask unanimous consent to reconsider that item. Seeing no objection, that item is reconsidered. What is
Move to
item
approve
number?
item 9E7, which is information memorandum, AIM 84-2016, ma'am.
Okay, it's on the addendum. Thank you. Thank you. Move to accept. Okay.
Okay. If there's a second, then we'll discuss this. Okay. The mayor wanted to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry. No, we wanted to do this first, so.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
This is your informational memorandum on the impact of the state cuts, Mayor, on the budget.
We failed to pull it, and so it was reconsidered, and so we're dealing with it right now, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. The school district, I believe, is here and can address some of the impacts on them more directly, and I think it'd probably be a better place to begin this conversation.
Okay, well, I'm really happy to have whoever is here from the school district come to the podium and share your thoughts with us.
Give me a second. For semi-members that don't know where this at, it's within your addendum to agenda. It's IM 84-2016. It's item 9E7.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Welcome. Please state your name.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Mayor. My name is Dina Paramo, and hopefully in 12 hours I'm going to be a new tax-paying, bona fide tax-paying resident of the Anchorage municipality. I am currently and was hired as the new superintendent for the Anchorage School District, and I'm happy to be here. Our board president, Ms. Tam Augusti-Giesler, is here, as well as our acting CFO, Mr. Andy Ratcliffe. We just want to share that the vetoes that did occur at the 11th hour the last week of June did impact the district in $5.4 million reduction in revenue. $1.4 million of those monies were never budgeted, so we're not going to experience the impact. In fact, not one of the 53 school districts actually budgeted the $5.4 million outside of the BSA. The cuts that were affected our school district were the reduction to the BSA by $50, which is the base student allocation, which is the funding metric per pupil that school districts receive. The impact of that is approximately $2 million. More so, we are impacted in regard to transportation, which is a separate fund, as well as there's three main funds that our school districts receive: nutrition, transportation, and the operation funds. And we have a plan for that as well, and our board president can speak to it. But where we are both collectively working on a solution to move forward is in the bond debt reduction, which was 25%. Approximately, the city is reimbursable by the state by $44 million. The impact of that is approximately $11 million. Presently, the school district does have a bond debt reserve, and the board on August 1st, and I'll also allow board president to speak to that, will request that those funds be used to, I believe as the mayor said, not necessarily reduce taxes, but maybe assist with the funds, the delta this year. In the fiscal year, it is approximately $6 million. As you know, you may know the school district fiscal year, and you run on a calendar year, and we're July 1 to June 30th. At this time, if you have any questions, but I'm going to allow the President to speak.
Good evening, Tam Agasti Giesler for the record. And yes, we do not meet in the month of July, so the next board meeting is August 1st, and the superintendent and administration will be putting forth a memo asking to put some of this bond debt fund balance to this deficit that we're now facing if this budget veto holds. And I can't speak to how the board will do that, but I do feel, my own personal opinion is that that is money that we collected for bonds, and it can only be used for bond debt reimbursement, and therefore it's a good practice to use that towards this deficit fund at this point.
Thank you.
And,
do you have any comments you'd like to make, sir?
Excuse me?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dombrowski, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Paramo, welcome to Anchorage. Your reputation precedes you. I don't know if that's a good thing for you because we have high expectations, but good luck and welcome. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding. Was I hearing it correctly that there's a $6 million delta, basically a $6 million shortfall, because the paper here says $8.4 million?
Through the President to Member Dombrowski, that is correct. That would be after the board's actions on the 1st, the recommendation, and at the time that was written and provided the information to the mayor's office, we did not have an exact number. We knew it was between $2 and $3 million, and the board will consider a $3 million transfer to the Assembly in those funds for the bond debt reimbursement, which would, in your fiscal year, make that up.
Okay, so in that fund that you had kind of set aside for bond debt money, how much was in there?
We've calculated there are $3.8 million presently. So $3 million will be recommended to move. The $800,000 for another rainy day if something like this should occur.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Trainey.
Thank you, Madam President, for being here. Got a question for you. I'm looking at a chart here that says we've got not yet issued GO debt for the school district of $48 million that haven't been issued yet. So hopefully before that's issued, we'll take a long, hard look at it. Because when it was given to the voters, it was said by full faith and credit of the city of Anchorage. We thought we'd have the money coming in, but we have no guarantee from the state. So I'd really appreciate taking a hard look at that if you decide to issue those bonds. Because we have to understand that the citizens are going to have to pay every penny of that. I got no faith in the legislature, as the governor says. They're in session, what now, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're in some special session down there. But I appreciate you guys taking a hard look before you issue these bonds.
We appreciate that. Just as a note, we will not be taking any action on bonds or bond debt sales immediately. We have asked the administration to provide a report giving us a look at capacity usage and overall facility needs in the entire district by the month of November, and that is going to inform our future actions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainey. Mr. Steele. Yes, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, welcome. I hate to have you have to come back and under these circumstances, and I hope that everybody lets their legislators know that this is not good for our kids. And you guys tightly control your budget. I know you usually have a little bit tucked away, and that's why you've got some bond reserve there. But education is not the place to be making those cuts, and so I hope everybody talks to their legislators about that, and we can find some solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot my second question, but it came back to me. So when we're looking at the ASD bond debt reimbursement, it says ASD has $43.5 million of bond debt for fiscal year 17, which we were expected. Are these all old bonds? Because we weren't expecting any from the previous 2015. So these are all old. That's the first part of my question. And the second part of my question is, many of us have been screaming from the rafters, bond debt reimbursement's probably going to go away in its entirety in the next couple of years, if you're really looking out there. So what plan is ASD, what do you have for that eventuality if it does come to place, or are you developing a plan just in case that comes?
Through the chair to Member Dembowski, yes is the answer to the first question, that these are previously sold bonds. So this is these were the funds in which the state paid their share back to us. Certainly, we're looking at this as a one-year issue, and with a possibility of being multiple years, if not moving into the future, whereby our state would not support municipalities and boroughs. There are areas in the state for which most of these bonds were sold on a 60-40 split, 60 at the state level, 40 for our city. And there are places in Alaska that are 100%. So education of a state being a responsibility, I can't foresee that that will go that will actually stay within the state. As you know, we had a Kasaili case which the state lost in supporting areas that were not incorporated. They're called REAAs that do not have availability to have local bonding, and the state did not prevail. They did have to build those
So you
schools.
think the likelihood that they're actually going to just cut out reimbursement for those old bonds is probably not going to come true then?
No, it has come true. We are living with 25%. When they did put bond debt reimbursement on hiatus for 5 years, but the statute in which that was done previous to the session that really isn't ended yet, it was last year, in the law, it said that there would only be a 50-50 moving in the future, and I'm sure that they will reconsider that 50-50 as well. So I'm not sure the span of when more will be the responsibility of local taxpayers or not, but presently there is more than $2 billion in assets, and which are facilities that belong to the city, which we want to care for, and there is a plan. Your third question, that is the plan of the board has asked the capital folks and myself to come up with the needs, a plan, plan A, plan B, plan C, because again, as many of you know, this was not foreseeable. I didn't really expect that bonds, as Mr. Trainee mentioned, that were kind of a contract with voters. They went in with their eyes wide open saying, I'm willing to pay 40%, are now responsible for more than that. And that's what's unfortunate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dembowski. Mr. Croft.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, Tam, Andy, and Dr. Perano. I was involved in the process that got almost to the end of selecting you. Had to leave before that, but it's a pleasure to see you here. We're expecting great things. You partially answered it, but so have we any preliminary indication, or we're just going to get a November report on facilities, consolidations, and maybe even school closings? Do we know anything, or we'll just know in November?
I have no further information from when you were still on the board when we put forward that request, so that's still pending.
It's going to be painful, but it's the natural consequence of this that great schools and great communities are disrupted because of it, I worry. But we'll look forward to that presentation then. Thank you. Great to see you both.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Weddleton?
2 points. Now, is this just information? We don't act on this?
We're going to accept it. There's a motion on the floor to accept it.
I see. Okay. I just want to understand. So it says here, if taxes were used to cover the funding gap, how else would you cover it?
Through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, I believe that would end up having to be covered through existing ASD fund balance. We do have some unassigned fund balance remaining in the general fund that we intended to use for operations, and additional fund balance set aside for bond reserve ratings. But that's all restricted at this point. So,
thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If members on the Assembly will look at line 21 on this page, the city talks about this permanent fund dividend reductions. It also affects how much money we get off garnishments. We're going to lose about $1.8 million in garnishments that we get every year. And so that's going to impact our bottom line as a city. It's not going to have that money this year. I just wanted everybody to read this document, understand what Harris is trying to tell us, and the mayor. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. There's no one else in the queue. Thank you so much for being here this evening. There's a motion on the floor to accept AIM 84 2016. Let's vote. Please vote. Are we missing somebody?
Screwed up. The rural people are the ones that are going to be screaming.
Okay, that AIM is accepted. We are now down to agenda item 9A3, AR 2016-195, designating July 15, 2016 as Charles D. Williams Day. Mr. Dunbar.
I move 9 Alpha 3.
Second.
Mr. Dunbar.
Yes, I'd like to read it.
Go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to read, and Mr. Peterson is going to present.
That would be great. Thank you.
So, is Mr. Williams here, or a representative, Mr. Williams? He didn't make it. He's 96 years old. Okay, well, I'm still going to read it.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly designated July 5th, 2016 as Charles D. Williams Day in recognition and appreciation for his dedicated and faithful service to the community of Anchorage and the Alaska area. Whereas Bishop Charles D. Williams, born in Ennis, Texas, spent his early years growing up in Dallas, Texas. Bishop Williams was inducted into the armed forces in 1942. He became known as an initiator, preacher, and an officer until he was honorably discharged in 1946. And whereas Charles Williams converted in 1946 and accepted the call to the ministry in 1949 while living in Stockton, California, young brother Williams started the ranks in the ministry as an usher, deacon, junior church pastor, and district Sunday school superintendent. And whereas Minister Williams, having arrived in Alaska in 1952, possessing a deep desire to begin a work for the Lord, he secured a building and began prayer services. Shortly thereafter, a building was erected. By mutual agreement with local ministers, they permitted an elder Osborne to pastor the church. And whereas in 1953, Minister Williams was ordained to the office of elder by the late Bishop L.E. Tolliver, the first overseer over the Church of God in Christ in the territory of Alaska. In 1967, God elevated him to the office of Bishop for the Church of God in Christ in the state of Alaska. And whereas he founded the Friendly Church of God in Christ, where the congregation grew tremendously from 3 churches to 12 churches. And whereas in 1993, Dr. C.C. Owens, the General Field Representative from Trinity Hall College and Seminary, conferred Bishop Williams with an honorary doctorate degree of divinity. The ceremony attended by the late Bishop Lewis H. Ford, the presiding bishop for the Church of God in Christ, was one to be remembered. And whereas Bishop Williams currently makes his presence known throughout the nation in his capacity of the Alaska prelate for the Churches of God in Christ in Alaska. He attracts children wherever he goes. He is known for opening his home to the homeless and to the downtrodden. And whereas he never hesitated to feed the hungry, he also made everyone feel like he loved them the most. He's loved by many, respected by more, and affectionately known as Dad. And whereas this year Bishop Williams celebrated 63 years as the pastor of the Greater Friendly Temple of Church of God in Christ, as well as 49 years in the office of the Alaska Prelate for the Churches of God in Christ in Alaska. And whereas Bishop Williams is a man after God's own heart and believes prayer is the foundation to one's relationship with the Lord. Men and women are blessed to know, learn, and be led both naturally and spiritually by his prayers. And whereas on February 22nd, 2016, he celebrated his 96th birthday with his wife, Lady Fannie M. Williams, of over 62 years, family, and Alaska Church community in the Anchorage area. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves that Charles D. Williams is recognized and appreciated for his dedicated and faithful service to the community of Anchorage and the Alaska area, and designates July 15th, 2016 as Charles D. Williams Day. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Municipal Assembly this 12th day of July 2016.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. We are now at agenda item 9B2, AR 2016-189, establishing certain supplemental contract conditions for potential marijuana vendors and marijuana trade show promoters in municipal facilities. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move to postpone until August 23rd, and I'd like to schedule a work session, please.
Second, and I'll ask actually first the Public Safety Committee to take a look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I don't see any objection to postponing that to the meeting of August 23rd, so that will be postponed to August 23rd. We're now at agenda item 9B3, AR 2016-190, establishing a debt management policy. Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I'd move to approve, but I can't, so.
I'll make the motion for Mr.
My
Evans.
screen's not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Mr. Evans.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For all those that were at the work session last week and those who have listened to it since then, I'll apologize for being redundant. I made most of my comments there, my concerns with this policy, so I'll be repeating myself a little bit. What we have is a good idea that we're formalizing our debt policy for the municipality. Previously, for the last several years, we've had an informal policy that was, the gist of the policy was that we wanted to bring down, or at worst, stabilize the amount of debt carried by the municipality. So the informal policy was that we would not put out on the ballot more bonded debt than we were retiring in that given year, thereby at least keeping even and hopefully going lower. And that's a policy, informal as it may be, that I fully support. I am not, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not terribly sophisticated in the ways of high finance. Mr. Harris and Mr. Risvold did a very good job of explaining this policy at our meeting, and there's a lot about this policy that I like. But generally, I'm just a Midwestern boy, and I don't like debt, and I like the idea of the city trying to reduce its bonded indebtedness as much as possible. My concern about this policy, I favor going to a formal policy. I think that makes sense. I agree that the rating agencies would prefer that. And I also applaud the calculation that went into this. Mr. Risvold explained how, the idea of the maximum amount of debt for a year, I can't remember the exact term here, the maximum annual debt number that we would be looking at under this policy takes into fact inflation and the growth of the city, which I think is a forward-looking and a good part of the policy. Because we retired debt from 20 years ago, that dollar that we retire had greater purchasing power than the dollar we're adding today. So it makes sense to incorporate that into the policy, and I support that. My concern, however, is that this policy says that maximum debt, our annual policy goal is to go up to 1.5 of that maximum debt. Now, that doesn't mean we would do that every year, and I understand Mr. Harris's point that just gives the municipality the flexibility to go beyond that maximum, I keep forgetting the dang term, the maximum annual debt limit. But the problem is once we put it in policy at 1.5, which means we can go 50% above whatever that maximum annual debt number is, that tends to become a target. Because I can foresee, last year we went above our informal policy. We put more debt on the ballot than we were planning on retiring. And that happens from time to time, and there were good reasons for it last year, I thought, because we lost through the RCA's process, we lost the dividend from MLMP and other things like that. But putting it 1.5 in the policy allows us to have the conversation next year or 3 administrations from now that we're not exceeding the policy because we're only going to 1.3 of our maximum annual debt. And it kind of gives the nod to anything less than 1.5. So my concern is that what this policy will do, if we approve it as written, it will tend to increase rather than to reduce or maintain the debt load for the municipality. Accordingly, I would like to move to amend the current, the proposed ordinance, and my amendment is very simple. I haven't put it to writing. It's just one number, and it's in on page 3 of the ordinance, line 23. where it says, so not to exceed 1.5 times the maximum annual debt, I would move to amend the 1.5 to 1.0. Thank you. And I believe in the discussions with Mr. Harris at the work session, even at 1.0, we still have the ability, when circumstances warrant it, when there's something unexpected or something, a great opportunity is before us, to exceed that and to go up to 1.5 or to whatever number. But the policy, the intent and the goal behind what we're putting forward will be to keep it at that 1.0 level. I just think that's a better policy. I'd be more comfortable with it, and I hope you would support that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So that amendment is on the floor right now. Mr. Mbasi, on the amendment?
For the most part.
Okay, Mr. Mbasi.
So I want to thank Mr. Risvold for his presentation. I listened to it multiple times, and I had a couple of questions. My first question is for Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, during a work session, there was a bit of discussion about how you arrived at the 1.5 number. Why are we going 1.5 times what we bonded last year versus leaving it at 1, and for the exception, then you make the exception. And your comments were what you thought about, there was a lot of discussion amongst everyone about what they thought might happen. My question, and that's how you arrived at the 1.5 number. My question is, what do you think might happen? What were those factors that drove it up to 1.5?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Domboski, through the Chair. The 1.5 number is really an attempt to capture what might happen in a variety of scenarios. So the debt management policy was written to be able to address cases where the municipality is experiencing level growth, a decline in growth, and an increase in growth. And as Mr. Evans noted, that could be from factors such as inflation or population growth. There could be other factors as well that would spur growth. So the point of that 1.5 language is simply to capture those various instances where you might see an increase, an opportunity for us to look at additional investment opportunities for the municipality of Anchorage, spurred on by any number of factors. So the idea was simply to try to have a broadly defined policy that was written as the rating agencies have asked us for, so that we could basically have something that we won't have to come back to and ask for an amendment next year, for example, or we want to do 1.1 or 1.2, for example. It was simply looking back at the last 5 years and saying, what would be the range that would work we've sort of experienced in the last 5 years. So that would be where the 1.5 came from, and hopefully that's about the same answer I gave at the workshop.
Okay. Mr. Risvold, my question to you is, you had talked about a historical view that you took to look to see how many times the municipality deviated from the not putting on the ballot more than they're retiring. I don't recall off the top of my head. Do you remember how many times that was?
Yes, Madam Chair and Ms. Domboski. We had a presentation, and in that presentation, we looked back 5 years for general purpose bonds for general government, and 5 years for school district bonds. In the past 5 years, 2012 through 2016, we looked at the debt retired versus the bond ballot propositions and what the voters authorized of those bond ballot propositions. One time in the last 5 years, and it was in 2016, did we ask for more in bond ballot propositions than was going to be retired during the fiscal year. And it was in 2016, and for example, we will retire approximately $36 million this year. We asked for 47, and we did receive $47 million, the full request from the voters. So it's about $11 million. So it's just a little slightly less than it's about 30% over the principal amount that we're retiring. So that sort of fits within the 1.5 category.
Okay, so this is what's got me. This is the sticky widget here that's got me. So essentially, in a 5-year period, even though I think it's a good idea to just solidify in writing the policy, I think that's a great idea. But the issue that I have is the way I heard the work session was essentially there's these exceptions, this happens sometimes, so we're going to draft the policy a little bit broader, so effectively we don't have as many exceptions. But it seems to me that we're drafting a policy for the exception, not the rule. So, I mean, this is a significant policy change, in my opinion. And so I don't understand why we've completely spun it, unless it's the fact that this administration just wants to bond a little bit more aggressively than the previous, and so they're giving themselves a bigger parameter. I mean, I'm trying to understand what the justification is and really, and there's no wrong answer, just what the justification is in bonding for the and creating this policy for the exception versus the rule. I don't know if anybody wants to take a stab at that.
Madam Chair and Ms. Dembowski, do you want to take this, Robert?
Thank you.
Please.
Madam Chair, Ms. Dembowski. Well, in this case, what we've tried to aim for, in the past we had an unwritten policy. So this policy captures, I think, 7 additional points, 7 points total, one of which is the piece that you're discussing, and Mr. Evans brought up about the 1.5 times factor. But there are a number of things in there that balance out. If you have additional borrowing, these other factors are going to come into play. So there's, it's a credit rating is a mix of factors that are considered by rating agencies, and they look at, the financial health of the city, how much money you have, how much you're borrowing, and so forth. I don't know if I'm answering the question that you. Am I close to the?
No, that's okay, Mr. Harris. My point is this: unless we're aggressively going to be bonding more, the presentation that we're changing this policy because sometimes we're outside of the norm, it doesn't make sense to me why we're fundamentally changing our policy to hit the one-time exception, unless it's a change in aggressive nature of bonding. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's a shift in policy, it appears to me, and it's being masked as we're just being broad. I just want to know what it is and where it's coming from.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Dembowski. So I thank you for clarifying your question. I apologize for kind of getting off track there. Again, I go back to the idea that this year, for example, one of the arguments was made for additional spending was that this is a great time to borrow. Interest rates are as low as they've ever been, and Anchorage is an important place to invest at the moment. So, in this instance, it was prudent. We looked at the various factors and where we thought we could put bond propositions before the voters to make a determination about whether or not those would be things we would recommend for them to approve, and in fact, this year they did. So the whole idea behind the change in policy is really to sort of capture where we think we would be based upon prudent standards. Again, interest rates are historically low right now. This is a great time to invest in Anchorage.
So, Mr. Harris, if I can ask one question on that, and this will be my last question. It was my understanding that the bond rating agencies allow for exceptions where you could come to them if you had a natural disaster. If any variety of things happen, you could come and say, listen, the reason we deviated from our policy is because look at how, would that be one of those situations that a bond rating agency would say, you know what, it makes sense, this city has all this on their capital improvement list and they can borrow really, really cheap right now, so that makes sense. Would that be a justifiable reason to have an exception to your policy?
Through the chair, Ms. Dembowski, certainly, as we sort of talked about in the work session, when those kinds of events happen that are kind of outside the norm, the part of having a discussion with the rating agencies is exactly that, sitting down and talking them through, explaining what's going on. In drafting this policy, one of the things we were aiming towards was that the conversation wouldn't start off with a rating agency about why we'd had to not follow the policy, but instead we could focus on why Anchorage was a great place to invest, why we have and we rightfully have a AAA bond rating. It was really to sort of try to craft a policy that wouldn't have us starting off conversations that if we did go to 1.1 times next year, for example, or 1.2 or whatever, that we wouldn't end up starting those conversations with a sort of a lengthy discussion about why we violated a policy that we just adopted. So the idea was to try to put out there a policy that we thought would be good for 2 years, 5 years, before we have to go back and examine it again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Flynn?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. My comments are both to the amendment and to the underlying resolution. I'm not from a Western family, but I'm married into one. So, and as the body's probably most confirmed dedaphobe, I certainly appreciate where Mr. Evans is coming from. And the reason I'm disinclined to support his amendment is threefold. First off, the purpose behind this resolution's debt management policy, as articulated by the administration in our work session, was that our rating agencies asked for us to produce it. And as your former South Anchorage colleague articulated upon her impending departure from this body, just defend that. Just defend our good rating. And this is an effort to do that. The second reason I'm disinclined, and this sort of harkens back a long time, but everyone knows I like a good story. I spent the summer after my junior year in high school working the spill in Valdez, and managed to comport myself without too much difficulty. And so, as a nod to that, my curfew went from midnight to I could set it for whatever time I wanted. And so universally I said, I'll be home by 2 a.m. And I was almost always home by 12 or 12:15. Because if I wasn't home by when I said I'd be home, I was in trouble. And the purpose of this policy is to say, this is where we're going to be within our limits. And we don't want to have to be continually explaining why we missed them. To me, the goal here is that we do, in fact, attempt to abide by the maximum annual debt limitations set on page 2. But rather than having to explain every time we go over that, we give ourselves that flexibility, and it can be used for good or for ill, as with any superpower. And we, as the people who decide on whether bonds go to the voters, are the first check, and the voters, of course, are the ultimate check. So for those reasons, I'm supportive of the way it's written. I want to maintain our excellent bond rating. I don't want to have to go back and explain over and over each time we nudge across that 1.0 line. But I do want to put some sideboards on there, so if we're going to really push the limits, we are, in fact, articulating, as Ms. Dombrowski said, wow, it's a really good rate environment right now. This is the time for us to seriously buckle down and get some capital improvements done, and then we'll back off for 2 or 3 years. So I appreciate Mr. Evans' concerns and his motion. I think I perhaps contributed to it in some of the questions and comments I made in the work session, but at this point, I'd recommend the body vote that down, pass the guidance as written, but maintain our responsibility as fiduciaries for this municipality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Traney.
Madam Chair, I want to move to change order of the day to take up item 11B. We've got a Assembly member that needs to go somewhere else, so I'd like to take up item 11B and then come back.
I'll
to
second.
The discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. We need to vote on that. Changing the order of the day to take up item 11B. Please vote.
You want to vote?
We will be taking up item 11B right now. Okay, thank you. Mr. Steele.
Yes, Madam, I move item 11B.
Reconsideration?
I seconded.
You moved to reconsider item
Yes, I did.
11B. Thank you.
I'm
And
sorry.
Mr. Trainer, you're the second?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Please vote.
No.
Somebody's missing. Mr. Dunbar? That item is reconsidered. Mr. Trainee, you want
We'll take this, I want to move to have this item come up at our next meeting, ma'am.
Okay, so your motion is to have this item on the...
On our next meeting.
July 26th
Now that we
meeting?
considered it, it's still out there.
Right.
We can bring it up at our
On
next meeting.
July
Some time
26th.
constraints,
Okay,
but-
can I have a second, please? Any objection to deal with this at the July 26th meeting? Seeing no objection, we will deal with this on July 26th. Now we're back to item 9B3, and I believe Mr. Evans was next. No, Mr. Croft was next in line. I'm sorry. Mr. Croft.
Both on the, on the amendment. I was out of town during the work session, but I spent some time going over the presentation both before today and then here today. And on the school board, we did a lot of work on this. I proposed that we establish for the first time an overall debt limit that was based primarily on the assessed value, the Anchorage assessed value. And the reason was I thought that, able to convince that prior board, that this limit of saying how much I should bond in this particular year should be based on what I did 20 years ago, what we as a city did 20 years ago, I thought was a poor measure. Recognize what we're doing. We're setting up a set of prudent standards, and we're adding a number of criteria that can be used to assess it. Instead of having no criteria articulated, we have a number of them, and that's a good thing. I'd like to submit that a number of the criteria on this list are better indicators of what you should bond in a particular year than what you happen to have done 20 years ago. That is, the debt that you're now replacing that comes due now, is simply a reflection of what you did 20 years ago. In particular, those are C on the list, which is the overall net debt as a percentage of assessed value. That's the way that measure reflects where your economy is, the size of what you need, what is going on, and is a better way to say in a particular year, how much should I be bonding? It's your overall health. In addition, G, rating agency criteria as they change from time to time, is a very good measure. It reflects reality. While I don't object to keeping F on the list, I do object to it being our primary criteria. To use, a family example, when we were first married, Joanne and I we bought a duplex, but we were in the small side when it was just the two of us. And that was just over 20 years ago. But we wouldn't be basing our mortgage decisions now on what we paid then. It was just us and then later a crazy dog. It was inappropriate for our current situation. We moved to the big side when we had our first child, got another dog. You needed more room. You needed to do something different. We're in that house, and now that daughter, that first child, is going off to school, and we're discussing downsizing in the next couple of years. But not based on what we did 20 years ago, what we're doing right now, and what we need right now. So for that reason, the administration placing this, how much you retired in a given year, as one of the criteria, but not the lead or sole, is an excellent idea. Secondly, specifically to the 1.0, the language there says not to exceed 1.5. If we wanted to say with a target of 1.0, that would be appropriate, with a general target of 1.0. But you've set it as an upper limit. It would be no more appropriate to set your target as your not to exceed than it would be to say a minimum of 0.5. Well, why would I do that? Or gosh forbid, a minimum of 1.0. You don't set your minimums and maximums at your target. That's not either prudent or you're never going to hit it. If your ceiling and your floor is 1.0, you don't have any living room. You've constrained your whole thing. So in general, I think this F is a poor way to run a family or a city budget. And it certainly shouldn't be a limit that is your target. That reduces all your constraint. I wouldn't set a minimum or a maximum at what I was shooting at. And I certainly wouldn't do it in this place that is planning for your current and future needs based on an accident of what happened 20 years ago. Much better to use all of these criteria together, set yourself a target of 1.0 if you'd like, and I'd be fine with doing that, but not a maximum of 1.0. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Steele.
Yes, Madam Chairman, mine will be short and sweet, I hope. Mr. Croft and Mr. Flynn, I think, said it well. This is guidance. This is a target. This is what you can shoot for. But things happened 20 years ago. It was a different time and place than it is now. And you can't take advantage. You need to be able to take advantage of interest rates and other factors. So to put the target rate at what you paid off is not, it's good.
Oh, got it.
You know, it looks good, it plays good to the audience, but it's not a good way to decide how much debt you want to incur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Weddleton.
You know, actually, my comments would parallel Mr. Croft's. In these 7 prudent standards, the only one that has any kind of numeric value to it is F. And I think in some case where Mr. Harris pointed out that with low interest rates being a good time to do bonds, if we had, instead of F as the limit or goal, say B, the cap on the debt service, as interest rates go down, our debt service would be less for any amount of bonds. But there's with the other 6 prudent standards here having no kind of reference point, it's kind of odd that they would be in there. They are all important, but then we just kind of don't put any factor on them. So it's puzzling to me. Regards to the amendment, I am inclined to support the 1.0.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in brief response to everybody, with respect to Mr. Flynn, I understand that the rating agencies would like us to have this policy. I'm no expert in rating agencies, but I believe a rating agency would like a policy even better the lower it set your increased debt. And even more than that, the rating agency would like our debt to go down. They'd be more thrilled with in whatever policy we come up with.
Yeah.
And with respect to Mr. Croft, I understand his point, and I would be willing to show that I'm a reasonable guy to actually amend my amendment to, if we just put in F with a target of 1.0 and left off the maximum, I'd be more comfortable with that, because that's at least what we have now, basically, is our informal policy of saying what we're trying to do is to limit the increase of our debt. And if the target is just 1.0, even if we go over that, we don't violate the policy, so we wouldn't have to go apparently hat in hand to the rating agency to explain our actions. If Mr. Croft would be amenable to that amendment, I would make that change.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, before you speak, Mr. Croft, okay, so in other words, on line 23, 1.5 times the maximum annual debt, and then add with a target, after the word debt, with a target of 1.0?
No, I would eliminate, I would change.
Well, Mr. Evans, can you just read the amendment then, the way you see it? Thank you.
Sure. I would have it be on line 20.
Wait 1 second.
I guess it's line 23. It says, minimizing or limiting the amount of debt on bond ballot propositions for voter approval of general obligation debt at any election with a target of 1.0, with a target, well, I see what the problem we're going to run into that is.
Just delete the entire section. Just delete it.
Delete F?
Yeah, delete that. We'll move on. I'll second if you do it.
I will amend my amendment to delete entirely subparagraph F.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Croft? Mr. Trainee? Okay, well, the amendment that's on the floor, proposed amendment, is deleting item F. It's beginning on line 21 and ending on line 24. Please vote.
Madam Chair, I had a request to speak. Could I speak before we
I'm
vote?
sorry, I just now saw you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Dunbar?
I would like to hear from the administration before we eliminate one of your criteria. Could you please tell us what that will do and whether the fall policy will still be functional if we take out a seventh of what you've asked us to do?
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Dunbar, it kind of an earlier question of what would the rating agencies like. The rating agencies would like us that where we borrow money, that we pay it back on time, that we have money in the bank, that we make good, smart decisions about what we're spending our money on, and that we're careful and prudent in our financial management, all of which I think are things that are true. The sort of the unwritten rule we've had so far is trying to keep close to the idea of, you know, if we have paid off $1 worth of debt, that would be sort of our maximum we would do in terms of a new piece of debt, subject to change, of course. Were it me, I would like to go ahead and keep F. I think that in the conversations with rating agencies that are coming up, I'd like to be able to explain to them, look, it's a fairly, we're a fairly prudent financially community. We're going to make decisions about how much debt to issues to stay within our means and live within our means, and that's, I think, one of the things that's captured in F. So, my suggestion would be, I would prefer to keep it just for that reason. I think the bond rating agencies are familiar with that piece of the discussion. And I would say, just to kind of comment about the other 6 items that are on there, the other items were there largely because as we have looked at the rating guidelines published by the rating agencies, those are all things they've said, well, we're going to look at these things as well, that, that as they go through and they crunch the numbers to find out what our bond rating ought to be, those are things that they take into account as well. So we were simply trying to capture those parts and pieces that were that we expected might be part of a discussion with a rating agency. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
Can I ask one follow-up,
Sure,
Madam
okay.
Chair? So, maybe of Mr. Riswald. Could you please answer that question as well? And then also, would you prefer us, which of these is less painful to you? If we do Mr. Evans's original, or his second amendment, rather, we change it to a target of 1.0, or if we eliminate F entirely?
Ms. Gray Jackson and Mr. Dunbar, thank you. There's, if I may, there's a lot of focus.
Can you speak in the mic, please, sir? Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. Is that better? There's a lot of focus here on the item F, which is the dollar amount called maximum annual debt, and the 1.5. As Mr. Harris pointed out, we have some criteria from the rating agencies that they have published and they share with the public. The actual first 2 items, A and B, on the list, there are what I call the highest impact to our rating when it comes to looking at the specific category of debt. When you are rating, there's a big structured component of your rating, and one of those categories is debt. Other categories include revenue, expenditures, tax base, and a lot of the economic environment of the community and what the status of that is. This one particular area has actually a rating. It comes up with a rating score like the others do. The 2 most important items on what we listed as prudent standards are items A and B. They impact and create a score of the rating agencies when they look at our overall credit. The next important one is overall net debt as a percent of assessed value. They also focus on overall rapid debt principal amortization, where there's a majority of it amortizing away in the first 10 years. And the number they focus on there is 65%. Does 65% of your debt outstanding go away in the first 10 years? And we happen to be in that category, as very favorably in that category. More than 65% of our debt goes away in the first 10 years, the next 10 years. Going back to item C, that's a percent of net debt to assessed value. Right now, we're in a category where as of 2014, our ratio was 2.14%, and in preliminarily in 2015, our net debt to assessed value is 2%. They like to see that category as less than 3%, so we're in the great, really good category there. It's called a positive incentive to the credit. But the most important two are the top two. Now, we also have these other three at the bottom, which are extraordinary circumstances, limiting the debt, and also other criteria as it may apply to our category as we are rated in whichever category we fall into. I started this out saying there's a lot of focus on the first one, but when we actually look at this, and when the rating agencies look at it, but when we look at it, looking at how much debt we're going to issue, we have to look at all 7 of them. And if we were to invade this 1.5 and every year go 1.5, 1.4, 1.3, what happens then is these other percentages would then fall out of the categories that are favorable that we are in now to earn a AAA rating. So everything really has to be looked at in aggregate here. Previously, in the last several years, we've had one criteria, and that was how much principal is amortizing away. And now we've got many of them, 7 different prudence standards here, and they're taken right off of the rating agency criteria that they use to rate us in this category of debt. And we've deliberated at length about how to word these, how to use these to satisfy rating agency expectations that they've verbalized to us as well as put in writing to us. We would like to see you establish a formal policy and put it in writing, and have our city body, our assembly, review it and deliberate about it as we are tonight. That is what they're going to look at very favorably. And again, I emphasize the fact that we're going to use all 7 of these prudence standards to issue debt in the future to propose debt on bond ballot propositions in the future is what we're talking about here.
Madam Chair, moment of personal privilege. We've got the governor on the line. I'd like to change the order of the day, take up the governor talking to us.
Can I have a second, please?
Sorry, sir.
To change the order of the day to listen to the governor. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Any objection to listen to the governor? Seeing no objection, please. Governor, please speak. Governor Walker?
Yes, I'm here.
Please speak. We're waiting.
Please speak.
Well, what are you going to say?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
The floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you so much. I know this is unprecedented, and I about lost my voice over the last week in talking about this very serious issue, so bear with me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Assembly members, and Mayor Berkowitz. I appreciate your taking this issue very seriously. It is a very serious issue. I'm going to read one statement to you, and it, I think, sums it up. Alaska is in the midst of the gravest fiscal crisis in our state's history. Now, those aren't my words. Those are the words of David Teal, who just 10 days ago made that statement in a report he did. David is a 20-year staff at the legislature and is the director of legislative finance. David is a numbers person, and he's well respected in Juneau and in the legislature. I couldn't agree with him more. He went on in his report to say that acknowledge that the budget has been reduced by 44% since FY13. That's a $3.5 billion reduction in spending from an $8 billion budget in 2013 down to what is now roughly a 2007 spending level of 4.3 for fiscal year 17. We're basically taking in 30% of what we're spending. You know, what we have seen in the way of budget cuts are something that I am very, very, or the veto that I did about 10 days ago is something that was very challenging for me because of my background in local government. That's been my background. And I know the impact of those vetoes, the impact of those changes. But, you know, we're at a point that if we don't make some significant changes in this state, we are going to have a very, very different state in a few short years. And when that happens, we will not have the wherewithal, because the savings will be gone, in order to build back what we want as a state. You know, I've watched the process go on, and I got to say, you know, pushing this off, a portion of it off to local government is not at all what we wanted to do. We introduced a complete fiscal package in December of last year to prevent what we had to do this last week. We did that because it was the right thing to do. It made some changes back to some of the things we did in years past, and not a single one of them was passed by the legislature. I will acknowledge and thank the Alaska State Senate for passing the permanent fund restructuring bill that has not passed the House, and so that is back in front of both of them now. If we don't make these changes, we're going to see an Alaskan that many Alaskans have never seen before. We have been through many disasters in Alaska. This one we can prevent. Governor Egan could not have prevented the earthquake in '64, nor the subsequent disasters that have taken place. This one is fully preventable. It is only us that will be the blame, Alaska will be the blame of not taking action to cause this to happen. The veto reductions that you saw and you're dealing with tonight, and I'm so sorry that you're having to do that, will be looked back as the good old days in a couple of years if we don't make the changes that we have proposed. If we don't have a fiscal plan that balances our budget, that brings in additional revenues and has additional spending reductions, we will have significantly greater budget reductions. We cannot balance the budget by reductions. We will have an income of about $1.2 billion, and that's about what the education cost is now statewide. So, you know, I'm certainly not trying to frighten anybody, but I'm going to tell you, it's pretty frightening from where I sit to see where we're headed as a state and the lack of action here in Juneau and now in our fifth special session. I'm happy to answer any questions that can be asked that you might have. We are engaging with the legislature to ensure that they get the job done this session. I have done the tasks that they did not want to do, that they felt were politically uncomfortable, and believe me, they are uncomfortable. But they're not politically uncomfortable. It's the right thing to do to make these reductions, these changes. So I've spent some time and spent some time with various mayors across the state over the past week, including Mayor Berkowitz and mayors in Fairbanks and the Valley, and the assemblies are all doing what you're doing. They're saying, what can we do to fix this situation from our standpoint, and you're facing immediate action. Oh, how I wish the legislature would do the same thing. They're not. It's too politically uncomfortable to make these changes, and so now part of it unfortunately falls into your lap.
Thank you, Governor Walker. Are there any questions for Governor Walker? Mr. Croft?
Thank you. So, Governor Walker, have you gotten any indication from the legislature that it's willing to act on some of these measures?
I have been meeting with them today and yesterday to encourage them to do what is the right thing to do. And I'm the ultimate optimist, but even with my optimism, I'm becoming concerned about their willingness to do what needs to be done to fix the problem. So I'm not. I haven't got any reason to be overly optimistic. I'll put it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. There are no other questions. Governor Walker, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Have a good evening. Thank you very much
for the time tonight, and I again appreciate your how seriously you take in this situation. It is very serious.
You're welcome, Governor. Have a good evening.
Yeah, bye now.
We're now back to item 9B.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Tran.
I want to move to take up persons to be heard We've got two people at 6 o'clock to 6:30. We need to deal with them now and then go back to where we were, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Can I have a second, please? Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, we're going to take up persons to be heard. The first on the agenda is Anchorage Park Foundation. Welcome. Please state your name.
Hello, I'm Beth Nordland, Executive Director of the Anchorage Park Foundation. Thank you so much for hearing our annual report this evening on a night when you may all rather be in a park. It's a beautiful sunny day out there. Does everyone have a hard copy of this colorful report? Would you mind, Madam Chair, if I
give it to the clerk? Thank you.
Okay, so every year I let you know what the Anchorage Park Foundation is up to. This year I want to let you know, starting off, the Anchorage Park Foundation basically is your nonprofit arm of your Parks Department. This is a public-private partnership, and it's a great, what we do at the Anchorage Park Foundation is that we combine resources, private resources, state and federal resources, and all kinds of grants. We're always applying for grants, and we make projects happen in parks. And I've worked with many of you on those projects, and you're familiar with what's going on in your own district, I do hope. To date, we've improved 157 parks in our 226 portfolio of parks. So we've done a lot of work, and that's with the community, with volunteers, with funders, donors, public and private. So I guess what I want to say is we're doing this in a very cost-effective way. We are inspiring non-traditional partnerships. We're stretching a dollar. We're attracting grants. We're introducing brand new donors to projects, and we're producing park and trail results. To date, we've raised more than $31.5 million for Anchorage Parks through the Anchorage Park Foundation. And I guess tonight I'd also like to say we've helped pass 7 of the 10 park bonds of the last municipal park bonds, and that totals $23.9 million. So we've done a lot of work together, and it's a great partnership. At the bottom of your paper, and also you can see in the square there how much of that is private, volunteer, Rasmussen Foundation, state capital money, and federal money. So diverse funding sources. Summer events that are coming up, we have the Teddy Bear Picnic coming up on July the 23rd to celebrate inclusive play in Anchorage for playgrounds. We have a skate park ribbon cutting, which is also the North Russian Jack Springs Park picnic. We have the Fish Creek Festival, which will end up being a ribbon cutting for 2 different playgrounds in Spenard. And I don't know if you know, it's the 100th anniversary of Spenard, so there's a lot going on this summer there. We have a ribbon cutting in Mountain View for Dildita Park.
That's okay.
We have wayfinding signs that'll be going in at the end of the summer for our Trails Initiative in Ship Creek. And then we'll get to cut a ribbon on our 2 new bridges that'll be going in the late fall. So that's a lot to look forward to. If you wouldn't mind taking a look at the map, which is on the back. And I just want to describe, we've broken our work down into playgrounds, youth employment and parks, neighborhood park fix-its, challenge grants, Anchorage Trails, and other. I'll start with other. There's 2 cool projects. One's a skate park at NOLA, the Polar Bear, which is North Russian Jack Springs Park. It's the first skate park that's cement in the ground. And we're excited for that project in Anchorage. And then we also have, at Ruth Arcand Park, we have a covered arena for the equine assisted therapy group. And so that is going to expand their season so that they can have therapy with people that have those needs on horses. The playground movement, I want to explain what inclusive play is. Our playground surfaces these days accommodate people with mobility issues, but inclusive play means involving all kids and families in the play area and a playground. And so that list that you see there, there may be many of these projects in your districts, but I just want you to understand that we're working towards inclusive play. And we have installed 11 inclusive playgrounds by the end of this summer, which is an amazing number, Ms. Gray Jackson, if you'll remember when you were talking to us about trying to get the first one in about 7 years ago. So we've made great progress, and now it's the standard. It's what we're talking about for all playgrounds. You'll see us on August the 9th for Youth Employment in Parks, so we'll talk about that later. But the challenge grants are in full swing, so hopefully some of your friends and family and constituents are talking to you about the challenge grants that they care most about. And then we have a lot of trail projects that are in play right now. We're working on wayfinding so that people can navigate the trails with maps, with signs, with an app, and it's all related. And, they can also find Pokemon characters in parks. But your other handout is about schools on trails. Each of you care about how the schools in your districts are best utilizing the trails near their homes. There's so much to say about the Trails Initiative, but I wanted each of you to know that we're working in your neighborhoods with your constituents so that they can best access the trails and be healthy parks, healthy people, right?
Thank you very much for your presentation, as usual, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of our community. Thank you. Mr. Steele?
Thank you for the work that has been done on the Westchester Lagoon, on that site. That's something I know I brought to you a couple of years ago, and you were interested, certainly, in getting something done on that. Luckily, we had folks that were even more creative than you or I to come up with the ideas of the school. It was something that particular park, the Margaret Sullivan Park, Westchester Park, it's on the south side of Westchester Lagoon, something that was used for previously, and it was good. It's good to get it back to that use, and I thank you very much for your effort.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, Beth, I want to thank you for the work that's being done on the Chugach Foothills Connector Trail, which I know is a YEP program. We've hit a little snag with the Chugach right away, but I'm hopeful that we can resolve that, and over the course of the next 2 summers, we can complete that trail. So thank you for the work you're doing there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you again, Beth, for everything you do on behalf of our community.
Thank you.
The next appearance request is Ron Aleva. Welcome. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Aleva, spelled A-L-L-E-V-A. This is a continuation of a presentation. I had 3 minutes. Madam Chair, when you request a public appearance, aren't you allowed 5 minutes?
No, but the good news is we're giving you 5 minutes, so please continue.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm here tonight to request that the municipality create a weapons turn-in day. And this would be similar to drug prescriptions, extra drugs that are sitting around, to be turned in and disposed of properly. With the weapons, I'm an auctioneer. I end up doing estates. You'll find guns in the closet, under the bed, under the bathroom. And I think it's in the best interest of the city to have these guns turned in and destroyed. I'd also ask that all the weapons that are in evidence be destroyed. This weapons turn-in day would be an action, not one that should be taken lightly, but one that should be challenged to all the cities in the state, along with the governor. We've had incidences in the municipality, especially during the ringing of the bell, 67 times for law enforcement officials here in Anchorage. And following that, we're all aware of the victims of Aurora, San Bernardino, Dallas, etc., across the nation, especially, I think it's Connecticut, but they lost their lives. And sadly, during this ringing of the bell here, law enforcement ran down a criminal who was shooting at them, the most heinous of all crimes. And the sadness is when they robbed my facility, holding out a handgun like this that may have been sold by the municipality opens us up to a lot of liability, and I'm sure some guilt feelings if this revolver was sold by the city and used, unfortunately, in the death of a law enforcement official. So I think there's enough guns on the market, and I think our action would be a message across the nation that we're taking an action. Not a moment of silence, not a prayer, not a flower, not a candlelight, but we're actually destroying weapons that are in surplus. I think the gun dealers would go along with this in turning in the weapons, because most times people who buy at gun shows or at auction aren't buying the right gun of their choice. And if you don't do this Weapons Day, then I would ask you that when you do sell the guns out of evidence, that you sell only to dealers, dealers to dealers. This would distance the municipality in liability, selling to a dealer, letting them resell it. They have the professional expertise and knowledge of examining the weapon, seeing if it's safe. Some have slipped through, cracked barrel, could lead to tremendous liability for the municipality. Nye Frontier Ford, $4.2 million when he dropped that gun. And it wasn't against the seller of the gun, it was the manufacturer. So surely they could pierce my insurance and go to the deep pockets of the taxpayer. So it's best for safety, for liability, and just general future use of these weapons to go dealer to dealer. So I know I may have 5 minutes, but I think the weapons turn-in day could go viral. As you see from the letter I gave you, this is not a new idea to me. I'm not a publicity seeker or jumping on some bandwagon. That letter I wrote previously was in 1999. Again, I would ask that these guns be destroyed. I have an artist who would weld them together and make a fine piece of art out at Merrill Field next to the War Memorial. We could use the methane gas from the landfill to create an eternal flame. This would be good PR for as far away we are from Orlando, Connecticut, San Bernardino. This would be a good message. And then the safety aspect of it is best interest of the citizens of Anchorage.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, you had a question?
Right, I guess this is a whole new thing. How does the police department come about surplus guns, and how many are you talking?
Well, the police department comes across their surplus guns through seizures. The courts can order them destroyed or turn them over to the municipality, lost and found. Sometimes parents will turn in a gun that they no longer need or their kids brought home. There's multiple ways of seizing guns. The state currently has an arsenal surplus of probably 2,000 to 5,000 guns that are about to come on the market, and I'd say unnecessarily. So to dispose of them, again, I would really stress the message would be, hey, we're not going to lose anything over cutting them up, making a piece of art. The message will be there. I don't think anyone will oppose this, and I think it would be a real gesture of solidarity with the victims and the families of people who have recently lost their lives, including APD. They had to run them down. And it would be a sad day, Mr. Wellington, if the city sold the gun. I want to emphasize that. And I want to emphasize 4.2 million, that Nye Auto dealership, now Kendall, was purchased with that settlement.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Weddleton?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you very much. There's no one else in the queue. Thank you. We are now back to agenda item 9B3, and where we were, there's a motion on the floor to delete item F, and Mr. Risvold had the floor. Mr. Risvold, would you like to continue?
Can you speak in the microphone?
Can you speak in the microphone?
Speak in the microphone, please. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to summarize my earlier discussion. The 7 prudent standards that we have written out, we would manage debt proposals to bond ballot propositions using all 7 of them. It provides the municipality and its citizens and taxpayers with the flexibility we need. It also meets the expectations of the rating agencies for us to have a formal debt management policy, and I would encourage the Assembly to pass it as it is written here today.
Thank you, Mr. Risvold. Mr. Evans was in the queue before we changed the order of the day. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Debate has been interrupted 3 times, so I think we should start back at the beginning again, since everybody's
I don't think so.
sure lost the train. This will be my last comment. I think perhaps, we're all just about on the same page with this as far as what we want out of this policy. The problem I'm having is that our previous informal policy set something that was very tangible. It was a direction. It allowed us to say that our goal, our policy is not to increase our debt. We're going to have less or the same amount. This new policy doesn't have anything like that is tangible, that gives us the idea that that is still our goal, to reduce our debt. It's just not stated anywhere in there. It's not, you can't read between the lines. I think Mr. Risvold's points are well taken, that these other factors are really the important thing, but those factors have always been in play. I think we always understood that how we manage our debt affects our credit rating, and all these big conceptual items are always important. This policy doesn't say anything about how those conceptual items are to be used tangibly. It doesn't restrict us in any way. It just says these are important factors, and I agree with that. And so the only place in the entire policy that has anything that is all tangible is that subsection F that has the 1.5 language, and that is probably what's causing the concern. And that's why I think, if nothing else, if we just remove that, then we're at a year-to-year basis as far as how we're going to use those 7 factors, all understanding that we want our credit rating to remain high. And each year we'd have to have that discussion, and there's no specific number. And I haven't heard from the administration that not having a specific target like 1.5 or 1.0 or 1 point anything would adversely impact our ratings agency review, because we're using all those other factors that they find so important. So I would just, I'm still, unless we can get rid of the 1.5, I think we've abandoned our previous policy. And Mr. Risvold makes a good point that we have excellent credit rating now, and I think it's because our previous policy was tangible. It was something we could grab onto and say, yes, we're not going to increase our debt. We're going to keep it lower or the same. And that's what gave us those good numbers on most of those factors that Mr. Risvold mentioned. I will say no more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Weddleton.
Mr. Risvold, you had mentioned on the first 3 of these that there are targets that the rating agencies tend to prefer. Can you tell me what those are? I think you mentioned a few.
Madam Chair and Mr. Weddleton. The two items that are first listed as a prudent standard is, the first one is net direct debt as a percent of total governmental funds revenue. That we are right now at about 100% of net direct debt as a percent of governmental revenues in the way the rating agencies calculate it. The score there is, the score that we fall into is 60% to 120%. We fall approximately in the middle of that score. The smaller the percentage, the better. So moving on to the second one, debt service as a percent of expenditures, the way we calculate that with the same way the rating agencies calculate it, we are at about 7.5%. They like to see, for the best category, less than 8%. So we're in the best category of that second item. We're in about the middle of the category of the first category I spoke of. So of those two categories, our final score comes out as adequate, which is a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. So we're adequate and not strong or very strong because of the net direct debt as a percent of revenue. So there are quantifiable these are quantifiable categories that we will look at each time we think about how much debt we would propose. And like I said, we would use all 7 of these, because if you skew one of them or violate one of them or go overboard on one of them, then it skews the percentages of the others.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, you had a follow-up question?
What did you have for C? Did you have a preferred?
Pardon me, Mr. Weddleton?
Did you have a kind of range that the rating agencies prefer for C, overall debt as a percent of assessed value?
Well, they use a chart, and as a percent, as a percent of governmental revenues, the chart goes, the chart starts at 30%. Less than 30%, then you're very strong, and then if it's 30 to 60%, then you're strong, and then the category we're in is 60 to 120% because we're at 100, and that's adequate. And then they merge these two to come up with one score.
That was A.
No, that's A. I'm looking at C.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Mr. Weddleton, you still have the floor.
Beg your pardon?
You still have the floor.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Well, that's it. Did you get that, Mr. Rizzo?
Madam Chair, Mr. Weddleton, would you rephrase your question, please?
On prudent standard C, overall net debt as a percent of assessed value, what is a range that the rating agencies would prefer? Where would we like to be?
Well, I would like to be in the category where we're less than 3%, and we are at 2.0% preliminarily with 2015 financial statements. Last year we were at 2.1. If you're less than 3%, you move that score that I just referred to as adequate, which is a 3. That moves it up to strong. So the first two items are very high impact items. This is a low impact item, but it can move the score 1 point. If you're greater than 10% of your net debt to assessed value, you lose a point. So if our net debt to assessed value was 11%, we would go from adequate to weak. And so we are where we like to be.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one else in the queue we have on the floor right now. Mr. Evans, or several folks, Mr. Evans' motion to delete item F. Please vote. Nope. Did everybody vote? Okay, that amendment passes 6. That amendment passes. We now have before us the main motion on the floor, which is AR 2016-185. Mr. Weddleton.
Can I move to amend?
Certainly.
I'd like to amend, looking at the prudent standards, line 8, so it would read net direct debt as a percent of total government funds revenue of less than 120%. I'd like to amend lines 11 and 12. This is B.
Mr. Weddleton, can you put your motions in writing so the clerk will have a clear understanding of what the motions are, and everybody else? Mr. Trainee?
Madam Chair, I think we need to postpone this to our next meeting, have a work session if we need to, and then have the Assembly members bring their amendments in writing. Because when we start verbalizing what the amendment is, it drives our clerks crazy trying to figure out exactly what did they say. The amendment should be in writing.
Is that a secondary motion, Mr. Trainee?
It's second.
Please vote. The motion is to postpone this 9B3 until the meeting of July 26th.
Mr. Harris is going to complain that he wants to go talk to the rating agencies.
Mr. Harris?
I'll let him do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like this to pass today if possible. Next week we're going to the rating agencies. I'd like to have this done. And I would say with respect to sort of the various amendments that might take place to A, B, C, D, E, and G, that what happens is that the rating agencies have a set of criteria that can change from time to time, and one of the things we captured was if, in fact, those change, that we go back and we take account of those. So, again, we're trying to define this broadly enough rather than pick this moment in time to say it has to be 120% and then the next one has to be 3% or whatever. So, if possible, it would be nice to have this passed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Harris, would you rather us take our time and get it correct or give you a half-baked response tonight? That's what the option is, sir.
Thank you.
I don't think the world will come to an end, will it, between now and our next meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Trainee, yes, of course. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, I would reiterate what Mr. Harris said, in that we're headed down to talk to the rating agencies. We had the expectations that this Assembly would understand what the definition of prudence was as outlined in this ordinance, and I had hoped that there would be a minimum of tinkering with that definition of prudence. We might all have our own understanding of what that terminology means, but there are legal understandings of what it is, there are financial understandings of what it is, and much as we might like to superimpose our own perspectives on that, any deviation from what is considered prudent creates a difficulty and jeopardizes our ability to secure a strong bond review from the rating agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Weddleton?
Having spent many years on the board of a credit union, these parameters are very scant compared to what we dealt with there. However, in light of the mayor's comments, I would withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion before us, AR 2016-190.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee withdrew his motion. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please vote on the main motion. That resolution was approved. Oh, boy.
Now you want to go back to where we were.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The next item on the agenda is item 9D21, AM 472-2016, Guess and Rudd, Inc. for professional legal services. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, I pulled that at the request of the administration. They asked us to postpone that item indefinitely.
Can I have a
Redo it
second,
and bring it back
please?
to us.
May I have a second, please? Any objection to postpone indefinitely? Seeing none, that item is postponed indefinitely. We are now down to agenda item 9F5, AO 2016-81, to require vacant and abandoned buildings to be registered with the municipality. Mr. Weddleton.
I move to introduce this.
This is for introduction.
I know. Did we have a third? Did we have a third, Madam Clerk?
I'll be third.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I would like to have this sent to the Public Safety Committee. I think I appreciate what this attempts to do, but I think it needs a little more work.
Thank you, Mr. Welton. Mr. Evans, if I may, you have a special Public Safety Committee scheduled for the 20th of August, correct? Of July, I'm sorry. Would it be okay to add this ordinance to that committee meeting for discussion so that we can maintain the 7/26 public hearing? Is that okay with you, Mr. Evans?
That should be fine.
Thank you. Will that work for you, Mr. Whittleton?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That ordinance is introduced. We are now down to Agenda Item 11A, Annual Municipal Procurement Card Purchasing Department, AIM 59-2016. Mr. Starr, are you on the line? Mr. Starr? Can you take the gavel, Mr. Trainee? Thank you. On behalf of Mr. Starr, I held the audit committee meeting, and it was very productive, and we got further information from the administration on the findings and recommendations. And at this point, I recommend that we accept this AIM, and I move to accept AIM 59-2016. May I have a second?
Is there a second? Second. Moved and second to accept this AIM. In discussion from assembly members. Seeing none, Madam Chair, please go ahead and set the vote pattern up for this. Please vote.
Yes. That item is accepted. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Item 11B has been postponed until the meeting of 7/26. It was reconsidered. We are now down to item number 14A, AR 2016-179, a resolution appropriating $180,893 for Housing and Homeless Services Coordinator. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Please state your name, spell your last.
My name is Ron Alleva, A-L-L-E-V-A. As I understand this and read this, this is money coming from the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority to salary up the homeless coordinator, one person. It gives me new definition to Alaska Mental Health Trust. These kind of wages are extraordinary for this position. I called across the nation, and no one comes up with this kind of income to handle that position. This is 2 police officers. This is 3 teachers. I think if you're going to address the homeless issue and have that kind of salary being paid, whether it came from the federal government, the state government, or the municipal government, you're going to have an awful hard time convincing people that the homeless are getting the trickle-down benefits of this kind of money paid to a coordinator. Now, I offered before when it was $160, I'd do it for $159. Now that it's $181, I'll offer my services at $180 and donate the residual back to the municipality. This is going to be a bad PR number that people are going to see across this city, and it's not going to be palatable to a lot of us, especially when these are allegedly hard times. That governor, what he just said, maybe they should tap the Alaska Mental Health Trust for a little money and Alaska Housing, because it's not coming from this guy giving up his permanent fund or me paying more taxes. So who's ever ahead of the Alaska Mental Health Trust, as a taxpayer in the municipality, I want this assembly and the mayor to find out what other salaries are out there at these numbers that we could easily find someone as competent to do it for less. This is disgraceful.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Yes, you do.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Evans, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. He doesn't. Thank you, Mr. Leyva, for being here this
Is
evening.
my 3 minutes up?
You have 31 seconds.
31 seconds. I want to say this issue of the homeless, and I'll tie it into this salary, that if you're coordinating, remember that Beans and the Brother Francis still owes this municipality $5,000 each. Now, they can use that money any way they want, but their insurance companies, in a hold harmless clause in their lease, was to defend this city. I want that money collected.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Please come to the podium, state your name, spell your last. Welcome, ma'am.
Deborah Hunter. I gave this information to Amy Dembowski, Mr. Croft, Mr. Trainey, and Mr. Steele, in case I didn't get a chance to speak. This is making me extremely pissed off, to say the least, that apparently a lot of people here in the Anchorage area know that there's a slumlord problem going on here, but nobody seems to be doing anything about it. I made a long-distance phone call up to Fairbanks and found out they're not having a problem up there. Clem, he's been there 20 years. The mayor elected there is Independent Eberhardt. Clem told me all the landlords up there abide by the Alaska Landlord Tenant Act. The problem is down here, what I'm finding out is the reason that all these property owners and property management companies are getting away with being slumlords is because they're not getting slapped with a civil penalty. Nobody's getting fined. With the problem with my situation with the Verde Lane apartment complexes, I had a problem with the heating problem. The whole Verde Lane apartment complexes were having a problem with the heating problem. It was a zone valve.
Ma'am, hold on a minute, okay? We really appreciate you being here, but what you're talking about is not what the subject matter is for this resolution.
What?
What your comments are not relative to the resolution that we have on the floor right now. The resolution that we have on the floor right now is funding for a homeless coordinator, and you're talking about something entirely different.
Okay.
So if you wait, you'll get to talk in a little while, okay?
Okay,
Thank
yeah,
you very
well,
much.
this is important because
Right, and you'll get to talk, but you're not talking about this matter right now.
Okay, yeah, I was confused, so.
Okay, that's okay. We'll see you a little later. Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on AR 2016-129, Housing and Homeless Services Coordinator? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, this public hearing is closed. What is the wish of the
Move
body?
to approve.
Second.
There's no one in the queue. Please vote. I'm sorry, Mr. Evans?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I just want to say, since I started on this body, I've been sort of involved in this homelessness issue, first with the ad hoc committee, and now with the formal homelessness committee. One of the best breaks we ever got was the fact that the Mental Health Trust stepped up and funded a homeless coordinator. This is a very, the homelessness issue, everybody may think it's simple, but it is one of the most complex issues for any urban area to deal with. And the only way you have a chance at dealing with it with any hope of success is to have a very coordinated approach that looks into a whole collective impact of various factors on homelessness. And we are at the point now where I have confidence that we are actually going to make substantial gains in this problem. It's a bad problem, and it's been getting worse, but we're at the cusp of good things, I believe, and largely because we have Ms. Burke in that homeless coordinator position. Things are coming together. It's the perfect situation for us. So I'm just very delighted that the Mental Health Trust is going to continue to fund this position, and I think she's a bargain at twice this price. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That item passes. Next item on the agenda is AR 2016-180, appropriating $200,000 from the state of Alaska, appropriating $4,398 as a contribution for emergency traffic control support along Glen Highway. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Second.
There's no one in the queue. Please vote.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That item is approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14C, Resolution 2016-181, a resolution appropriating $1,700,046 of revenue for Campbell Airstrip Road upgrade and trail improvements to the road to mile 0.7. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
There is no one in the queue. Please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That resolution is approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14D, AO 2016-56, adopting the citizens' naming panel's unanimous recommendations to name the new Anchorage Fire Department Station 3 for the late State Representative Max Gruenberg. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Hello, everyone. Welcome.
It's nice to be here. My name is Sheila Salcraig, and I chaired the Citizens Naming Committee for the Fire Station 3, and I'm hoping that you will approve our unanimous recommendations. The committee consisted of John Locks, Carolyn Ramsey, who's here today, and Karen Cameron and myself. And I think you saw when we were introduced this to you quite a while ago, that Max was recognized, I think, by people on both sides of the aisles, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. And one of the thoughts I had when we were working on this is that he's a really good example of civility and a good opportunity for us to reflect in these times where people are so angry at one another, to reflect on our capacity actually to appreciate each other. And he lived that way, and I'm hoping that you'll remember him through this act. Do you want to make any comments? Any questions?
Mr. Trainee.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for doing this. It's important we remember Max's contributions. And I think the mess we have in Juneau is indication we wish he was still down there. So thanks for taking care of this.
It was a real honor, I think, for all of us to participate in this. And I also want to say thank you to Daryl. He made it very easy for us.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dunbar.
I would just also like to echo what Mr. Trainee just said. Thank you so much for doing this, and of course I believe you made the correct choice.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you very much for being here. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Domboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Peterson's not here, and I know he would love to have been here. I just want to start by thanking, and I truly mean it, thank you to the members of the Citizen Naming Panel for participating. I only briefly had an opportunity to meet and work with a little bit Representative Gruenberg. I'll never forget, I met him over in your neck of the woods, Mr. Dunbar, at one of the Muldoon community markets. And he was so kind and so giving, and he gave me a lot of good advice, actually. He was working with me on a piece of legislation. He said, well, you should think about it this way. And, you know, it really goes back to what you just said, Dr. Selcraig. He had this compassion, and it didn't matter what political spectrum you were from. He was willing to teach you. He was willing to be kind, and he was willing to see and watch others in the service of their community. And I know it's maybe a little to some, but I hope the community remembers that spirit. And I was just very proud to be able to stand with Mr. Peterson and Mr. Dunbar in this honor to Representative Gruenberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Dunbar.
Just very briefly, this probably is my last chance to speak on the record about Representative Gruenberg. Was a friend of mine, someone I deeply respected, and I know everyone did. In addition to being a great public figure, he was also a veteran who served honorably, a father, and those of us who went to the memorial know that he was greatly loved by his family. So unfortunately, Pete couldn't be here today, but I know he would echo those same kind of sentiments. So again, thank you to the panel, and I look forward to visiting the Max Gruenberg Fire Station.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I don't know anything about the man as a politician, but I know him as a customer of mine for decades, and he has the premier Dick Tracy comic and memorabilia collection in Alaska.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is item 14D, AO 2016-50. Oops, sorry about that. AO 2016-72, acquisition of real property at 421 Nathan Circle. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
No one in the queue, please vote.
Say yes or no.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That item is approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14F, AO 2016-73, long-term lease between the Municipality of Anchorage as leaser and Arco Twin Inc. as leasee of Lot 2, Block 4, Merrill Field, replat. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That item is approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14G, AO 2016-63, amending the zoning map and approving rezoning of approximately 3.95 acres for lots 10, 11, and 12, Nasia subdivision. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That item is approved. Next item on the agenda is AO 2016-64, amending zoning map and approving rezoning of approximately 0.83 acres, lots 1A, Block 2, Thomas W. Spurstad, subdivision number 1. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. No one in the queue, please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That ordinance is approved. We are now down to item 14J, AO 2016-76, and we also have a substitute version that was on the addendum. I'm sorry?
Did we do 14I yet?
Did I say J or did I say I? I said J. I'm so sorry. I. Okay. AO 2016-76, and we have a substitute version that was on the addendum. Amend the provisions related to the Housing Maintenance and Occupancy Code. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
That's what she wants.
Thank you.
Come
on down. It's time.
Yeah.
It's time. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I'm glad I got this opportunity to speak. Like I said earlier, what I'm finding out is that what's happening at the Verde Lane, what happened at the Verde Lane apartment complexes, that building is 50 years old. That's Cora Weaver's jurisdiction in the Midtown area. When I had it was a neighbor of mine downstairs, she started having problems. She's the one that called Cora Weaver first, not me. She said all these problems in her apartment, then she said Unit 21, she's also having a problem with heating. I was afraid to get targeted by management and that they'd evict me, so when Cora Weaver went to the apartment, but the property manager was not there. The maintenance man was there. She saw all these things, these things need to be fixed, then she comes up to my apartment and she says, is everything okay? My heat was on. I said, yeah, everything's okay. And she goes, well, here's my business card. Call me if I have any problems. That was in December. The thing is, my heat had gone consistently off. So then what I did was I signed a one-year contract. I waited till my lease agreement was up, and I signed a one-year contract. And then I finally called her in January of 2014. Hey, my heat keeps going off. The landlords don't want to do anything about it. The thing is, what I'm finding out, and Cora Weaver, the very first time, twice she wanted to fine the landlords. Real Property Management, Last Frontier, RPM. She told me twice that she wanted to fine them. The second time she said a big, hefty fine. Guess what? her white boss, apparently Jack Frost, told her to hold off fighting him. And then comes up this lie, oh, the boiler room incident. The maintenance man, it wasn't your zone valve, a boiler room incident, which was a lie, and I told Cora Weaver that. And all of a sudden, no, boiler, Brian said boiler room problem, this and that. And then when I kept telling Cora, I said, you know that's not the problem. I want a new zone valve. And then Cora tells me, she goes, well, is your heat on right now? And I said, yes, it is. And she goes, well, we can't do anything about it. Your heat's on. So after that, then I kept trying to push to get the heat back on. But now what they're doing, those two manuals say, the Alaska Landlord Tenant Act, the Municipal Housing Code Enforcement, the manual says, heating system has to be in good working condition. Not going bad, not having a part going bad, needing to be replaced, not a part malfunctioning. And this is what I'm finding out. There's lots of maintenance men here in the Anchorage area that know that. They understand those manuals. They do not have a reading comprehension problem. They understand what it means for something to be in good working condition. A lot of maintenance men are here in the Anchorage area are telling you that. In the Anchorage area, if you let your heating system go off, especially with the Verde Lane, it's got hot water running through the pipes. The pipes can freeze. Simple as that. Some of these old buildings are not insulated very well. I lived in two old buildings prior to moving to Verde Lane. Apparently they weren't insulated very well. During the heating cold crisis, we were told to run our water so that our water wouldn't freeze.
Ma'am, thank you very much for your testimony. Your time is up.
Well, what the problem is, these people aren't getting fined, and this is coming from Jack Frost.
Right. We really appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Yeah, well, there's more information here, but this information that I asked from the mayor's office, Mr. Frost lied to the mayor's office.
Thank you, ma'am. Your time is up. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Good evening. Kevin McGee, last name MCGEE. I'm calling, testifying on behalf of the NAACP in support of AO 201676. I'm appreciative of the fact that this was initially published back in the 70s, and that the Assembly, as well as probably the administration, felt the standards needed to be updated and revised. A couple of areas that came to notice, specifically Section 15.10.050, item C, where it says every owner shall provide and maintain appropriate receptacles and conveyances for the removal of ashes, garbage, rubbish, and other waste incidental to the occupancy. Being that this is underlined, I assume this is new, which is important. Also, Section 15.10.1110, minimal thermal standards. Section A2, subsection A, space heaters which combust carbonous fuels not vented to the outdoors may not be used as a primary source of heat. As a temporary primary heat source, non-vented space heaters may be used for a maximum of 48 hours to meet minimum thermal standards. Owners who cannot comply with the minimum thermal standards in 12 hours shall procure reasonable substitute housing for the occupant at the owner's expense until such time as the dwelling unit is fit for human habitation. Like I say, in behalf of the NAACP, we are in support of this new ordinance, this amended ordinance, and feel that it will go a lot toward the benefit of both owners and tenants. And also to address the section 1510.230, saying that retaliatory actions are prohibited. That's a good beginning, so we can see if it needs to go further at a later time. Thank you.
Sir, Mr. Weddleton?
I just want to know, you read, Mr. McGee, you read a couple sections, and did you recommend changes to those, or you're just highlighting those?
No, I highlighted them because they were underlined.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that these are new additions, and it was just something to be pointed out that we are in support of.
Okay. And we have an S version, which has mostly just clarifying language, but nothing else. None of the sections that you referred to are changed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome, sir. Please state your name, spell your last.
My name is Tony Jackson, Jackson, and I'm here to speak on several amendments to the Code Enforcement Ordinance 201676. A little history: I bought a house in a nice neighborhood 6.5 years ago on Lower Hillside. The property backing to my neighborhood and my house has been a problem ever since. It's a dilapidated cabin with dozens of abandoned vehicles, and there's been upwards of 12 individuals living on this property over the years. To deal with the problems, I didn't know what to do.
Excuse me, sir. Are you testifying?
Sir, this one deals with landlord-tenant issues. The one you want is deteriorated properties. That's coming up later in the meeting.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll get you there.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, there's a point of order there. I had some conversations with Mr. Jackson. I think he makes some points that are relevant to this. Is that
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Sir, please continue.
Okay.
There's a crossover between the two issues.
Okay. So back to my point, there was up to 12 individuals living in dilapidated campers, vans, cars, this cabin with no sewer, no water, and no gas on the property. I've witnessed men and women defecating, urinating, dumping honey buckets all over the property, as well as mountains of trash, using burn barrels to burn their trash, and as well as the numerous times I've had to call emergency services, the fire department or the police, due to drunken behavior, domestic violence, unattended burn barrels, etc. I sought help through the municipality and literally went through the phone book to try and find a department to see what I could do about this particular issue that was affecting my family and my neighbors. The first person I contacted, or department I contacted, was the noise abatement people to try and see if there was anything to do about a generator that was running all night long until it ran out of fuel. I then contacted the code enforcement folks regarding all the individuals living on the property, burning their trash, living outside basically, and dumping their honey buckets throughout the property. I also sought help with the code enforcement people when a trucking company started using the property and were running semis 24/7 off the property, 40 feet from my house. Excuse me. Now, in 2014, there was a non-conforming document issued by the code enforcement folks that deemed all structures non-inhabitable and all commercial vehicles not acceptable on the property. Code enforcement still could not implement it due to the grandfather clause for the particular owner that basically they could not enforce the current statute. I've called the ombudsman with the mayor's office twice with this, seeking help. I was told that they spoke with code enforcement and that they felt bad for me, but there was nothing they could do. Code enforcement also stated that there was...
Please sum up, sir.
Code enforcement also stated that there was no sense in fining this particular owner because they wouldn't pay the fine. So there are several amendments to the ordinance which I'd like to try and show my approval for. As a person who made complaints and called code enforcement, the noise folks, numerous times, I feel that it is that I did these in good faith, and I feel the amendment to put the good faith cause into this amendment would be the proper thing to do, especially when you're dealing with a chronic issue and there's numerous things going on throughout years.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Name is Ken Perry, P-E-R-R-Y. My purpose is basically to thank the members of the Assembly, the Ombudsman's Office, the Health Department, and everyone who's worked hard on this particular document. My interest obviously came in regard to my business, which had to do with issues in regard to responsibilities for insect and rodent control in buildings. I am frequently asked, who pays, who's responsible, and all I could give was a moral response. And it was not just the tenants who asked. In deference to Ms. Hunter, I don't think that the vast majority of our landlords are slumlords. I think we have some excellent landlords in this town, and many of them asked me too, who is responsible. So they were shackled also by not having clear direction. And so by doing this, you have made that possible so that everyone knows what the playing field is. You've brought the issue of penalties up to a real world penalty that will actually mean something should it become necessary. And just once again, I want to thank you all for your hard work in this regard.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
My name is Miranda Walso, W-A-L-S-O. So I had prepared remarks with the specific numbers sections prepared, and I sent them home with my daughter in her backpack. So I'll try and do my best to recall them. One of the things that I've experienced in my life is when I went through college, I had the opportunity to work as a PCA with disabled Alaskans. And while doing that, I saw a very different world from that I grew up in. The woman that I helped, she had trouble with her heat. And her heat went out, and it went out frequently. And she was forced to use space heaters. And when that happened, there was also problems with the electrical wiring. And it sent her electric bill from $75 to $325 for a single month. It was something that had been noted before, that they had worked on changing, but didn't happen. She had her utilities threatened to be shut off. She had to rely on family. It did not get better. And she was not the only person that had this similar experiences in this apartment building. And one of my concerns with the changes in the code is that it mentions, a period of time with no heat and then change and then it resets. And when you have ones that are continuing to recur, the drain on individuals who are in these circumstances is much different. It's cumulative, and it's one that they're not able to redress after. Having the ability to understand the Landlord-Tenant Act and then get somebody to listen to it and then present that case and then deal with it is one that those of us who have can afford the luxury of fighting over it. When you have someone who has other issues, they can't. And so while I think these changes are good, I don't think they go far enough to address issues like that because, it's cold. When people don't have heat, they're not in a good quality of life. And that's not reasonable. When it happens over and over again, that needs to be documented. The cases need to be connected. So I encourage you to look again at finding ways within this ordinance to acknowledge those specific instances and improve them.
Thank you. There's no one in the queue. Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
My name is Deborah Baines. I am neighbors also with the adjoining property that Mr. Jackson was talking about. I've been there 38 years on the property. It's been just an ongoing, they've dealt drugs off the property. They've had no water, no sewer. I've spent a lot of money with getting a well and septic permit, and my neighbors next door literally defecate in the woods next door. It's, like I said, I've had several women come running to my house when they've been beat up or raped next door. They've had, it's just a really bad situation. I have a lot of children at my farm, and I've had teenage girls and young kids there when a drunk lady came over, beat up from next door, and I had to bring her in and just call the police. We would like to see code enforcement have more tools to properly be able to do their job with these chronic problems. It's just been ongoing. We've called and called on this, and we've repeatedly been told that they can't pay the fine, so there's no use even pursuing. So if fines aren't going to fix the problem, then possibly criminal charges or other avenues. It's a health issue. It's it's just been 30 years of an ongoing problem. I don't get the generator noise that Mr. Jackson does, but it's just been an ongoing issue I've been there 38 years, so.
Thank you very much for your testimony, ma'am. Anyone else wish to be? Mr. Evans, thank you. Thank you.
Haynes?
No, that's okay, thanks.
I believe, I know where you live, and I believe it's in Mr. Weddleton and I's area.
Yes.
So why don't you, if you could, after this is over, why don't you reach out to us, and we'll try to see if we can put together some kind of plan for addressing.
I'd really appreciate it. We have called and called. We've tried to go through the proper avenues, and it just has been ineffective so far.
Well, we'll see what we can do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Trainee had a question?
Ma'am, have you contacted the Ombudsman on this issue at all?
Yes, we have. Mr. Jackson and I have both tried to use every avenue.
And what did Darrell tell you guys? There's nothing you can do on it?
Yeah, that's what we've been told, that their hands were tied. They were.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Madam Chair, move the S version.
Second.
Thank you. There's no one in the queue. Please.
Actually, can I?
Mr. Weddleton.
Well, we got very late in the game some letter from the gentleman who spoke, and from Pied Piper. And there are a number of amendments here. I count them up at 6. And do people have a copy of this? Okay, and I'm not sure if the last 3 or 4 in this case are correct. They seem to make sense, but I'm not sure. But the first 3 seem to make sense. So I guess I would like to move those as amendments. Can I do it one at a time?
What amendment are you speaking about, Mr. Weddleton?
He's got 3 points on his first page of this letter.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I might.
Certainly, Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, Mr. Weddleton,
I confess that perhaps my tenure in this body has gone on too long, but I get a little impatient with 11th hour suggestions that are not vetted.
Right.
If you consider these to be of particular import, I would appreciate your making a motion to postpone this item for a couple of weeks to see if these are actually good ideas or not, or letting it go through tonight and then we can look back and see if we got it right later. Either course is satisfactory to me, but I prefer not to see amendments on the floor at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Weddleton, are your amendments in addition to the S version amendments?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I'm going to be your voice of support. If you think they're good amendments, I'd like to see them. I don't have a copy of that letter, so I don't know how extensive they are. I think I might have thrown it away in my oodles of paper I had earlier. But, I'd be happy to entertain them. I just don't have it in front of me. So it's your call. You're an assembly member. You get to make amendments if you want.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. I don't think any of us have copies of your proposed amendments, Mr. Weddleton. I respect and appreciate your efforts, but we need to have copies of them.
Okay.
We can just take action on it and bring them back as amendments later. Madam Chair.
Mr. Trainee.
From my perspective, I would like to see us pass this. We bring the amendments forward later on, after they've been properly vetted.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton, well, you heard what Mr. Trainee's suggestion was.
No, I beg your pardon. So
thank you, Ms. Dombrowski.
So I'm sorry, so Mr. Trainee, your suggestion was what?
To approve the S version as it stands tonight, and then we'll work on getting your amendments back in front of us.
If these look
later.
interesting, okay.
At a later date.
So we properly vet.
Okay, that would be fine. I'd withdraw the.
It's been 40 years. The public's been waiting for this ordinance.
No, that's
to be
fine.
updated.
No, I agree. I tinkered with it quite a lot over the last few weeks, so this seemed like more of the same kind of tinkering. So, but that's fine. Okay.
I spend a lot of time in the Ombudsman's office, and I hear the people coming in with their complaints, and that's what started this process.
Right.
But I had no way to deal with the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton, thank you for your indulgence. Please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That ordinance passes. We are now down to agenda item 15. And
Madam Chair, I was slow on, but I was almost about to vote yes when you called it. Do you want my vote on that?
I thought you did. I'm sorry, Mr. Croft.
It's okay.
Madam Clerk, was there an issue here?
It was just blank on the screen.
You're in now. You can go.
Yes.
You're in. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're now down to agenda item number 15, and there is on the laid-on-table items a special order. And I would ask Mr. Falsey, on behalf of our citizens, to explain what we are about to do here.
Thank you, Madam
And-
Chair.
Thank you.
The administration has laid before the Assembly for consideration and potential action today a proposed emergency ordinance which responds to the bill signed into law by the governor to reform the criminal justice system in Alaska that was signed into law yesterday. The law has many wide-reaching effects, some of which will come online in 2019, some of which become into effect in January, some of which come into effect in 30 days. But some provisions of that law became effective immediately. And I'm going to ask our municipal prosecutor to provide any additional assistance as needed as I described them. But the three that came to our immediate attention was there are three types of actions which are declared to be misdemeanor crimes in municipal code. They are failure to appear at a required court appearance, failure to comply with your conditions of release when you're released on bail or probation, and the final one, driving with a license that is suspended, canceled, or revoked. When the governor signed SB 91 into law yesterday, that law prohibited us from criminalizing those activities. It does allow us, however, to make them minor offenses, which can be sanctioned with a citation and a fine. But we have no authority in municipal code to issue those citations or to issue those fines. We have introduced for consideration in regular order a proposed ordinance which will come before the body in 2 weeks. But absent action on this emergency ordinance, there would be a 2-week enforcement gap where the Anchorage Police Department would be unable to effectively respond to either failure to appear, violating conditions of release, or driving without a license.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Trainee, you had a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the body, this will stay in effect if we approve it for 30 days. And we've got Mr. Evans, who's going to have a meeting of his committee on the AO version of this. So this is unusual. We normally don't do emergencies. I think we only, the last one I can think of was Bear Valley years ago. So it's not something we do lightly, but in the instance that he quoted, we need to take care of this now. So I'll be voting to approve this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I now need a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
And a second. And Mr. Evans, Mr. Falsey.
I just wanted to correct for the record, emergency ordinances by operation of the Charter cease to be effective in 60 days unless sooner repealed by the Assembly.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. Thank you, Mr. Evans. That ordinance was approved. We are now down to agenda item 17, audience participation. Anyone wish to speak? Welcome.
Yes, good evening. Madam Chair, for those of you that did not have the opportunity, last Friday here in our city, we had a rally. Ultimately, it wound up being what you could determine as a venue of fellowship. Respectfully, we had our mayor, our chief of police, and Assemblyman Dunbar. On behalf of the NAACP, this is the statement that was read by me. The NAACP Anchorage, Alaska wholeheartedly rejects the reprehensible acts of violence that have been perpetrated against members of the Dallas Police Department. Our hearts break for the families of the officers who were lost as they protected protesters and residents alike during a peaceful rally. Regardless of how angry or upset people may be, resorting to this kind of violence should never happen and simply cannot be tolerated. Violence against violence will never solve the problem. We are witness to a perfect storm of rage, pain, weapons, and a hot summer, and all the issues coming together. This is a paradigm shift of rage going outward. Alton Sterling of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Philandro Castile of Falcon Heights, Minnesota, did not deserve to die. Let's be clear. We have said Black Lives Matter. We never said that only Black Lives Matter. That was some in the media, not us. In truth, we know that all lives matter. We've supported your lives throughout history. Now we need your help with Black Lives Matter because Black lives are in danger. The harmful rhetoric that comes from former Republican representative from Illinois, Joe Walsh, does more harm to the situation as he tweeted on Twitter, quote, 3 Dallas cops killed, 7 wounded. This is now war. Watch out, Obama. Watch out, Black Lives Matter punks. Real America is coming after you. This is the epitome of the barely disguised racism that has been fueling the Republican Party for the past 20 years. The same negative energies and misplaced resentment that was funneled into the Tea Party movement following the election of President Obama. These are very difficult days once again to be black, but we cannot accept the actions of those with the attitude that violence is the end result for a means for justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Mr. McGee, just thank you for maintaining a positive and hopeful message for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. As always, I enjoy listening to you speak and interacting with you. I think I still have a lot to learn, and I think together we can make the community a better place. I do have to say, though, I don't think the Republican Party is racist. And I appreciate we try not to be partisan here, but the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln. And so I just want to say that I know you made that comment in there that some parts are, and I think you struck at it a little bit, that within all organizations, sometimes there's bad seeds, whether it's Black Lives Matters, whether it's a particular party, but the hope in your message is a great one, and it's one that together we can do incredible things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski.
As I started by saying, the gathering that was held Friday ultimately led to a fellowship. All races, creeds, colors, nationalities, genders, everybody was there. We all prayed together. Ultimately, the goal was the same. We need to look at things with a peaceful perspective, and we need to realize that whether or not you're not going to agree on everything, but if you take the time and the patience to sit down, discuss the issues, eventually you'll come to an agreement, whether or not everybody likes it, but ultimately it will be better for everybody just to sit down and talk things out.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak? Anyone at all? Okay, we're now down to assembly comments. I have one really brief comment, folks. I just want to welcome my friend who's visited from California, who sat here while we were doing. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Height. Mr. Dunbar.
Just very briefly, I think for the good of the order and for all Assembly people going forward, I would prefer if Assemblymember Evans always vocalized his votes. I found it extremely entertaining.
Mr. Flynn.
I just want to point out that a young woman who you got to know, some of you got to know during the tennis court debate, Ms. Athena Clendaniel, hit a 3-run triple in my son's Little League game earlier tonight. So girls rock.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Falsey.
And very briefly, I just wanted to acknowledge that attending this Assembly meeting was Angela DeLuca, one of our legal interns for the summer, who's been serving us capably and will be with us for a few more weeks.
Wonderful. Hello, Angela. Anyone else? Can I have Ms. Domboski?
Just because we're doing shout-outs, I want to thank the members that came out to Eagle River for Bear Paw. We had a wonderful event. It was hot, very hot, but it was well attended. And I also want to congratulate the American Legion Chugiak Boys JV baseball team for winning the Woodbat tournament over the weekend. It was the first time in their history they beat Kenai. So Kenai came in second, Chugiak came in first, so congratulations to those young men.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Falsey?
I apologize. There was one other item that I did want to bring to the Assembly's attention, which is substantive. The next Assembly meeting will be the first Assembly meeting where the Assembly is called upon to act on municipal marijuana licenses. Because they are like alcohol licenses, they will come to the Assembly in the form of a resolution, so they don't appear on an agenda for a public hearing that's set into the future. Unless the Assembly wants to set it off into the future, that will be the meeting where you'll see the application and act on the application. The first two are cultivation licenses, and there'll be a testing facility either at that meeting or following closely thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. How about a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second? Meeting's adjourned.